Welcome back to the podcast.
How's it going, folks? Welcome to The Straight Man, where we give it to you straight. Straight up conversations.
That's what we aim to do here. Straight to the point.
Straight to the point. Today's episode is about getting old, aging, moving on, not being the center of the universe anymore, not being a generation, one that's becoming more and more obsolete. We were millennials, and at one point it was all about us, but now this Generation Z, they have a new language.
Nice.
Right?
Yeah. Oh yeah, everyone's getting older. Everyone thinks they're getting smarter.
But have you noticed that, you can't keep up with the slang anymore?
Yeah, oh yeah.
I've been out of date. Nothing is cool anymore. It's
What happened
fire.
to our slang?
I know, cool. Cool is the opposite. They went for fire.
Our slang
That's
is
fire.
gone now. It's been replaced.
Awesome. Yeah, now it's no cap, which
We
means
s-
you're not lying.
Yeah. Don't cap.
Yeah, exactly.
No
Your
cap.
Riz. I got good Riz.
Riz is like dating, like game.
Total game,
yeah.
exactly.
We used to say
Libido.
radical. You remember radical?
Yes.
I wish I could say radical still.
Do you think that was because of...
Ninja Turtles?
Yeah, and exactly. And that archetype, that Jeff Spicoli kind of archetype from Fast Times at Ridgemont High.
Fast Times, yeah.
Because that was kind of like the same as Michelangelo. Awesome, totally awesome.
Yeah.
The voice was the same.
Fast Times at Ridgemont High is a movie that most kids haven't seen today.
No.
That one that didn't make it into the new...
A lot of stuff. Because now, anything past 2000, I think, is considered old. I saw a video where TikTok kids were asked what they consider old.
Yeah.
And they were Generation Z, and they said anything past the year 2000. I was
saw-
born in the fucking 80s.
I saw a TikTok of the new generation. Which one? What are they called? Z?
Zoomers, yeah.
Zoomers.
Generation Z. Yeah.
It was Zoomers playing Nintendo games. And it was funny, they're like having to put the cartridge in, and they're like, I don't know, you know how you have to put it in and push it down?
Totally.
They didn't know how to do that.
And it doesn't always work, so sometimes you have to blow
You
on
gotta
it.
blow on it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's...
So aging, yeah.
Yeah, how do you personally, I feel my body aging for the first time in my life. I have to wear glasses all the time now.
Yeah.
My knees hurt.
Well, when we were starting this show, you wanted to call it millennial,
Totally.
modern millennial. And one of the reasons that I was resistant to that is I don't really feel like a millennial. One of the things is we're right on the cusp.
Yes,
So we're the oldest millennials.
totally. You
Right.
could say the prototype millennials.
So there's that. And then also I'm working at this retirement home. So I'm always hanging out with 90-year-olds.
That's a clash.
So
wow.
my brain is a little bit absorbed in the older generation.
Yeah, the greatest generation, they call them, because they were that war generation.
Yeah, and they have that, their worldview is that it makes sense to them for someone to have to fight against Nazis.
Or tyranny.
Yeah. That
Totally.
makes sense to them. If you were to say, oh, that could never happen again, or we don't have to, war isn't, we don't gotta fight in wars, they'd be like, what? Yeah, we had to. That was our only choice. Whereas other generations are kind of like, war? No way.
Totally.
Why war?
And they don't see the fact that sometimes you don't have a choice. You have to, or you're going to get wiped off the map. Right?
Yeah. I was just watching, we talked about that Zelensky-Trump meeting.
Yeah.
And the vice president in the meeting, he says to the Ukrainian president, he goes, well, I heard you are having conscription problems. You can't get guys to join your army anymore. You're having to go and kidnap guys to bring them into the army.
Yeah.
And I was just thinking, hasn't J.D. Vance ever heard of a draft dodger? People don't want to be in the war.
Trump was a draft dodger.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah. He said he had bone spurs.
See the
He got
irony.
twice.
The irony of JD Vance saying
Exactly.
that
They're hypocrites.
when Trump was a draft dodger.
But it was like almost too like, you know, when you were a kid and one of your friends is taking in some heat from someone else and
Yeah.
his buddies
Yeah,
jump
yeah,
in.
yeah, yeah.
That's what it reminded me of.
I know. And one of the ladies at where I work, she goes, it was kind of like a mob scene, like two
Totally.
mobsters
Totally.
that
The
are trying
language.
to kind of trying to bully another guy, like, oh, we want your minerals and
Yes. And Trump is of that New York mafia era.
yeah.
The 80s.
He's of the New York 80s. Yeah,
Yeah, and I bet you he knew a bunch of those guys.
probably. Yeah, the what was the main guy?
John Gotti was
Gotti.
the big guy, yeah.
And that's weird about the word gaudy, because gaudy started to mean, like, if you're gaudy, it's kind of like you're being too much. Like,
Totally.
I was
That's a
thinking-
good question. I must have come from him. They used to call him the Teflon Don.
Teflon Don meant they tried to charge him with stuff and nothing would stick.
Stick, exactly.
Right? And they didn't
Even
they get
so-
him on tax
They
evasion?
got him on taxes.
That's how they always get the mob bosses.
Someone accidentally ran over his kid.
That's how they got the main guy from the 50s or whatever.
That's how they
Capone.
got Al Capone.
That's- it's
and then
tax evasion.
syphilis got him in the end. That's what killed him.
Yeah, he got sick.
Yeah, syphilis. It rotted his brain. But anyway.
Karma.
So that must be. So would it be a safe assumption to say that the majority of the people where you work, the senior
Yeah.
citizens,
Yeah, yeah.
are pro-Ukraine, right? And they're pro-fighting. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Because they see Putin as that threat that they remember from the Second World War.
yes, and a lot of them, like some of them served in the military.
Wow.
And so they just have that leaning of like patriotism.
Yeah.
Like they're very a
but
lot
doing
of
the
them
right
think of
thing.
themselves as Canadian, and like you know, like you wouldn't convince many of them to become American. Like,
No, and I'm sure but what they believe Canada stands for is fighting against tyranny, is
Right.
fighting for freedom.
yeah. Part of Canada's identity is to stand up to bullies.
That which is pretty awesome.
It's cool, yeah.
And so most of them had absolute disdain for Trump and Vance during that meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing about aging, though, and this is kind of like the flip side of that, is like, you know, they're very patriotic. They're very like do the right thing, whatever. But some of them are like, did you ever meet an older person that's kind of stuck in their ways?
Yes.
What do you
And
think?
stuck in like 1964, even though
It's
it's
like kind of like stubborn. Like they got their back up against the wall and they're like, oh, that's not how I do it. Like I'm not.
Yeah, I find that too with older European folks, especially men, like old
yeah.
Italian men have, and that's a generalization that I don't want to make, but I've experienced older people being very set in their ways.
Yeah, so why do you think it, like, what's strange to me about it is how do you live 90 to 100 years and not have that kind of worn down, like that ego?
But maybe it's the opposite. It's strength because they say to themselves, I've been around for 90 years. I've made it this long. No one's going to tell me how to do my thing because I'm successful. What do you know? You're 20. I'm 90. I've made it. You talk to me when you've made it 70 more years. That's probably how they feel.
I understand your point. I just don't. Where is the humble part? Like
Totally.
life humbles you.
Hey, that's a good point.
So like you go through a divorce, you see all these other people around you dying.
You have kids.
Yeah, you have
They grow up.
and then it's strange to me that you could make it through all of that and not see the compassionate side of life where you're like polite to people and respectful all the time. You can still be a little bit like rough around the edges.
Yeah.
But
But also accepting of other, yeah. But it's, again, if you've made it that long and you've seen the stuff that they've seen,
yeah.
it's a harder sell. Do you find yourself like you've hit your peak physically and now it's just downhill? Do you think you've gone to that point?
Physically where I'm at is like I make sure to do push-ups almost every day because for a little while I was having some back pain. And I think it was because I stopped working out. So what I've noticed is physically, like if I don't do a minimum amount of push-ups every day, pretty much every day, every second day, my body loses like a little bit of muscle tension.
How many do you do a day? 100?
Sometimes 100, sometimes just 50. 50 is like the minimum. What I usually do is I'll try to get to 50. If I go a couple days without doing it, then I can't get to 50 usually.
Okay.
So then I have to go back down to like 30, 35, 40, 45 to get back to 50.
I used to do 100 every second day or every third day,
Yeah.
usually every second day. And I haven't done push-ups since I broke both my arms. And
It's not easy to get yourself to do anything. Like
No.
self-discipline is a tricky part of being a human being, but what I found is like having back pain is freaky. It's
Yeah.
really like
and it just pushes you to fix it.
yeah. So that's why even if I don't work out much during the week, like if I only work out once at the gym or go for a run, I'll still do the push-ups because I'm scared of shit of having the back pain.
Have you noticed the aging in your eyes yet? And your hair?
Nothing in my eyes, no. My
Really?
eyes are, yeah, my eyes
You
are
don't
good.
need reading glasses.
I noticed when I was drinking, like I'm not really drinking much right now, but I would get really bad hangovers, and I always wondered if that was
I think that's with age, definitely.
the older I get, I can't handle alcohol the way I used to.
When I
be
was
able to.
17 and 18 and 19, I could drink 3 nights in a row
Yeah.
and be full, go to work the next day.
Sleep in your car.
Yeah, totally. Now,
It's
if I
weird.
have more than 3, I don't want to get out of bed the next day. Like,
Yeah, like being in your 20s is weird. My brother and sister are in their 20s, and
that's interesting.
I'm watching them kind of the things that I remember doing, like you're saying, you can stay up late, you can party, you can do all that stuff. And it's like, yeah, you sleep a lot more when you're younger, I think.
We did.
Like there's just things about the human body that seem to be different when you're in your 20s.
Totally.
And it changes the way you act.
You can also sleep less. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, I also hear that like this younger generation isn't partying as much, not drinking as
I
much.
heard that true. I don't know if that's accurate.
Well, my friend has a son who's in grade 8,
Yeah.
and when we were in grade 8 is when which is terrible. We shouldn't have. But I think grade 8 was the first time I had a beer, but it's like there's no way he told me his kid would ever do it, would have any interest in that. It's all about video games, and he plays hockey as well.
Right. Do you think it's because bars are less like popular, or like something about the bar scene?
I think so, definitely.
So there's less bars now, maybe.
Yeah, that's a good point. Less nightclubs.
Is that true? Maybe. I see. I have no way of knowing.
I have no idea. I haven't been to a nightclub in years.
So we're millennials. We obviously don't. We can't really understand the Zoomers as.
The slang always throws me off. And it seems like it's evolving way faster than slang did when we were kids. Like, cool was the phrase for a long time. Now it's the opposite. Now it's fire.
You know, an interesting thing about generations is a lot of people think that the baby boomers had it like easier as far as buying a house and like the economy and things like that.
I think they did.
So there's some, it's almost like resentment now.
Totally. But there's always one generation that everyone forgets and ignores when we're talking about. Everyone says Zoomers, millennials, and boomers. What's the one generation they're forgetting?
What?
Generation Xers.
Oh, X is in the, where's
Yeah.
it? Where's X in the middle?
Generation X is after boomers, before millennials.
Oh yeah, X. I think
Generation
my parents are
X.
X, aren't they? Probably.
My parents were born in the 50s and the 40s, so they were boomers.
Oh, okay, yours
You
are
were born,
boomers.
I think, 60-something and onwards to the 70s.
So do you think it's fair for the younger generations to be looking at the boomers and the X generation and saying like you screwed it up for us or you had it too easy or all that. Like even with climate change, there's a bit of that going on.
Totally. I don't think we can be. I think that deters us from coming up with real solutions for the problem. Like pointing the finger.
Yeah.
It's your fault.
It's
you
not
ruined
fair.
the planet. I just think it's counterproductive.
It's like, how could they have known that
Let's find out who's
fossil fuels would do that, right?
Yeah, and like South Park did an episode about that, how they're always looking for someone to blame instead of like fixing the problem.
Yeah. I know, it makes us seem ungrateful, right? The younger generations that we're just pointing the finger.
Yeah, I think like the boomer generation has a built-in edge because they survived the Second World War and they were around for that and they saw that. Whereas like the Gen Xers, well, they would have been around during the Vietnam War, but
Yeah.
it wasn't the same scale.
The boomers are on the cusp, though, aren't they? Like, they were kids when the war was happening.
Yeah, exactly.
So they weren't-
That's why
they
they're
weren't,
called
like,
the boomers.
they weren't fighting or
because there was a boom,
Yeah,
a
yeah.
spike in kids being born during the Second World War and
Right.
afterwards.
Right.
So, and then after the boomers, it's Gen X, and then millennials, and then Gen Z. So if we're at Gen Z already, what's this generation after Gen Z going to be called? Because Z is the last letter of the alphabet. Where do they go from there?
Yeah, they'll figure out something.
Alpha?
Yeah, something like that. So back to this war idea. Like, since they are almost dead, like they're gonna be gone soon. The people that fought in the war. I was at a memorial.
Oh yeah, you're right.
I was at a memorial service, and there was hardly any vets compared to years before. And so I'm kind of curious to know, like, with this whole Trump thing going on, and the idea that he wants to annex Canada and Greenland and Panama and Gaza. And I've been thinking lately, like, okay, if there's a third world war and Canada's with NATO against the United States, or who knows how the third world war would play out these days. But in terms of war, I was also looking at that Ukrainian situation as like, people really don't want to fight in wars, and I don't blame them. But during a wartime, you don't have a choice. Like, that's the idea of conscription or patriotism, is like everyone fights pretty much. Like, that's just the way war is.
Yeah, and I think people are resistant to change. No one wants to roll over and let a dictator move in and tell them how to live.
Like, you probably, I don't know if this is true, but do you think of yourself as like a peaceful person? So the idea of having to defend a country, does that not sit well with you in terms of...
I'd want to defend my way of life
Yeah.
to an extent.
That's a good way to put it. Way of life. Like, you don't... Yeah, I don't want to live under a dictator.
No, and I don't want to be told what to... But, I mean...
I wouldn't want to live in Russia right now.
Exactly. Putin kills journalists. I
seems
wouldn't
like
want to live in a place where someone kills journalists.
Yeah, you want freedom of the press.
Exactly.
That's like that seems like a fundamental human right.
See, what I never understood as a kid, and I'm sorry for going off base here, was if it's called democracy,
Yeah.
and you're a Republican and you hate Democrats, then you inherently hate democracy, right? Because the Democrats,
Yeah, that's
the same word.
actually, I did a little bit of research into this a while ago. The word republic, the way they think of that word, like what a republic is, they have a different definition of... So the definition of republic has... This is the way I heard a Republican define it. But the idea is, it's not majority rule because of the Constitution. That's the way they say it. So because they have a Constitution, even if the majority want something, you can't necessarily do it if it goes against the Constitution. So it's not a democratic style.
Here's the irony, though.
Yeah.
In Ireland, the Irish Republican Army and the Irish Republicans are all left-wing. They're all Marxist.
Oh, right.
They're not right-wing.
So they're using the word republic differently.
Exactly.
I actually wondered about that because what I think is happening is they're using the word Republican to mean what they want it to mean.
Totally.
Yeah. So the idea that they're not democratic is ridiculous to me. Like that they want to live in a country without voting. That I don't think they really want that. I think they're just.
No.
I think it's like
Some of
something
them
you say.
don't believe that women should be allowed to be president. I mean, that's
Yeah.
the antithesis of democracy. Barring someone because of their genitalia.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. Like, well, how do you feel about communism? Like, for example, in China, that's a undemocratic style. They don't.
But
they don't
is it true communism? Because look how materialistic China is.
I just mean the government.
I know,
the
but I don't
government's
think
not a
it's
voting.
true.
It's not
Yeah.
a voting type style.
No, and plus it's a dictatorship, and
Is he a dictator?
yeah, yeah.
What's his name? Xi.
She.
Yeah. It's XI, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I kind of look at it like he's the leader of the Communist Party, but I don't hear of him making like big decisions. Maybe I'm just out of touch, but it seems kind of like the party, like they have some kind of a system of like autocracy. Like,
Yeah, it also seems like communism didn't really wash off on the Chinese people because, again, brands are very big in China, right? That's why they have so many knockoffs. Nike,
Yeah.
all that stuff. And, like,
You're thinking of, are you imagining like a Soviet style communism? Because I think communism in its nature doesn't have to be non-materialistic. It's just, that's how the Soviets
I
did
just assume
it.
it's the opposite of capitalist, right? Where China is still very capitalist.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
Um,
I guess because they produce so much, like they have so many factories in China, it makes sense to me that they would have like nice stuff or like a lot of goods and like.
but that goes against communism, right? It's all about the worker. But anyway, we digress.
When they're making all this stuff, yeah, I don't know. I've never been there. That's one place I kind of want to check out. Yeah,
that's why I'm learning how to teach English as a secondary language. I'd like to eventually go to Vietnam or something.
Vietnam.
And teach there, yeah. Or China or Japan. Those are the three I want to visit.
Yeah, I've been to Japan.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it was nice.
Anyway, we would digress.
Yeah, we're on aging, right? So we're doing an overview of like world governments and what it's like to be a millennial, having grown up with almost no wars. Like the only wars that I really remember watching on TV were Desert Storm.
Gulf War, yeah. And maybe 9/11, which again.
That's pretty much the same war.
Or Bosnia. Yeah, well, but
It's similar, but it's
10
not the
years
same
apart.
war. Yeah. So Afghanistan.
yeah.
Was-
And Iraq. They went into Iraq under false pretenses.
Yeah, but actually Afghanistan was NATO, right? Which means it's a little more like the world governments got together and said to themselves, okay.
But it didn't make sense because, and it still doesn't make sense because Al Qaeda was mainly funded from the Saudis, not from Afghanistan. And I remember during that time after 9/11, people would use the word Taliban and Al Qaeda interchangeably.
Yeah.
And that wasn't right at all.
Yeah. I look at it like NATO, like the European countries primarily, were watching what happened on 9/11 and just looking at it like terrorism is a huge threat to the peace of our countries, and so we're just going to try to take care of it however we can. And the idea that there weren't weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, it wasn't necessarily the purpose of NATO going over there. It was more like
And it wasn't NATO that went into Iraq, it was the U.S.
NATO went into Afghanistan. Yeah. So that's where the terrorism threat was stemming from. And so that's why the NATO countries felt the need to act together.
But again, why didn't they go after the Saudis? Because a lot of that, of 9/11 was mainly funded by the Saudis.
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I just know that the whole purpose of NATO, or the point of it, is if one country gets attacked, that the whole group is supposed to.
It's like having backup in high school.
It is, yeah. And just look at, like, in the last couple years, there's this argument that NATO brought in some countries that were too close to Russia. And supposedly that's the whole reason that Putin is freaking out about Ukraine, is that NATO is creeping up to the edge with, like, the latest two countries were, what, Sweden and Finland?
Yeah, but the irony of saying that and then invading fucking the Ukraine, the Crimea, you know what I mean? Like,
Well, I guess it's irony, but it's just, from his view, NATO was going too far. That's what people are saying he was thinking. I'm not saying it's right.
but if another country joins NATO, isn't it their own sovereign decision to do so? How is, you know what I mean? Like, it's not like they were forced at gunpoint to join NATO.
No, I like NATO. I'm trying to understand what Putin's mindset is. Like, why would he feel so threatened by this group of countries that are helping each other? And I guess to him, it feels like a threat, it's almost like the reverse of the axis of evil during World War II. He looks at NATO as like, oh, here's all these countries with armies that are creeping into our area, and so I'm going to do something crazy and invade Ukraine.
Yeah.
I guess that's his mindset. Like, I'm not saying it's right.
And again, back to 9/11 and Bush, he used the term axis of evil. And I remember after 9/11...
What did Bush say?
Bush used the term axis of evil to describe Iraq, North Korea. Remember?
No.
The axis of evil. Yeah, and
See,
he
that's just
lumped
ridiculous.
Korea into there. Yeah.
They're too small to do anything. Like,
I know.
they don't pose a threat to world, like, they're not going to take over the world.
So, anyway, back to our generation being of 9/11.
Right.
That being the most significant thing to happen.
Yeah.
For this new generation, these Zoomers, the most significant thing to happen, I think, in their lives is COVID, the lockdown.
Yeah, you're probably right. So back to 9/11, like, that actually spurred a lot of our generation in the U.S. to join the military.
Totally.
So-
Even in Canada, I knew a bunch of guys
Yeah.
that after it happened, they joined the military. Guys I
Really?
went to high school with. One
Okay.
was killed.
Yeah,
in
that makes sense. That makes sense. But in the U.S., it was like a huge thing. It was
Huge.
It was like, put a flag on your car.
Oh yeah, there's even an NFL guy who quit to go fight and was killed.
Tillman or something.
Yeah. Yeah, and if you owned a printing shop during that time, oof, you're racking in the dough.
So it kind of makes sense, or it goes to show that our generation, we're still patriotic. Like, that didn't go away.
No, but again, after 9/11, I think that was the first tragedy where people made money, blatantly were making money off of it. All the 9/11 commemorative t-shirts. After the 9/11, do you remember there was like people trying to hawk backpacks, so if it happened again, you could jump out of the building.
What's your point, though?
I think it was the first time we learned how to monetize a tragedy to that extent.
Like, human beings, you mean?
Yes, and make money off of it. Because, like, people are still making money off the name 9/11. All the merchandise, the TV shows, the tie-ins.
You're saying that's a bad thing, or?
I don't know how to feel about it. Because A, it creates awareness. Oh, I'm so sorry. But B, they're still profiting off of it. So yeah, I don't know how to feel. Because you don't want to forget that it happened. And maybe we're in a point where, like, it's impossible not for someone to make a financial gain off something, even if the intent is for education.
Yeah, you're sort of expressing a view that capitalism is running rampant and it's not maybe healthy, or that it's not ideal for humans to be acting capitalistic or something.
Again, I don't know. I just think that I just think that that was the first time I've seen something like that commercialized to that scale.
Right.
Again, but that, like, my life at that point, it was before 9/11, you know what I mean? It was like a fresh delineating event. So there was a time before it and a time after it, because they were both so different. Post 9/11.
Yeah. You didn't feel like that about Desert Storm? Like watching, I remember watching the tanks rolling across the desert and thinking like, holy shit, this is a televised war. I'm living through a period where war is just live on TV.
I was more into
That was-
hockey cards. I think I was
Wild.
8.
The other one that I remember from the 90s that really defined what I felt like is my generation was OJ.
Oh, definitely. Definitely.
When I watched the white Bronco going down the LA highway and he's like on the phone with the cops and he's like saying, like,
He's crying and losing it.
yeah,
His buddy's driving.
He's like, I'm not going to turn myself in. I have a gun. Remember he had a gun?
He had a gun.
He's like- and they thought he was going to shoot himself.
True. That trial was everything. I
then
remember people watching it in class.
Well, the trial became basically racism 101. It was like they had the black lawyers.
Johnny Cochran.
Johnny Cochran was OJ's
and
black
he was
lawyer.
a good lawyer.
And then the prosecution got a black lawyer, and people thought they just hired a black lawyer, so they also had a black lawyer.
Totally.
And then what was also crazy was like when the glove didn't fit,
You must have quit.
everyone assumed that was like evidence that it wasn't his glove, which is crazy.
Yeah,
Like,
because it shrunk because of the fluid that
it
was on the
shrunk,
blood.
and he was wearing a
A glove inside
Yeah.
of it.
And then, so that all happened. He gets found innocent. And the black population in America celebrates.
Yeah.
And this is like, everyone,
She was brutal. She was almost decapitated. Like,
basically white people were going like, why would you celebrate this? This guy clearly killed someone and he's getting away with it. So then it became two different races going, we just witnessed the same event and black people celebrated and white people are
but you
like,
gotta, but black people, it wasn't, I think, him getting off. It was them having a defeat against the LAPD.
That's right.
Who, right after the Rodney King
Rodney
beating.
King,
yeah.
yeah.
So I think it was more like, we finally got one on.
Yeah, that was. But I'm just saying, it was kind of shocking
Totally.
to watch.
As a kid, too, because you're always told murder is
Murder's
wrong. But then
Yeah.
you're like, wait a minute.
Yeah,
how come-
and I remember for a long
is
time
it-
thinking like, okay,
He did it?
no, I remember thinking maybe he didn't do it because I was a kid. And when you're a kid, you're kind of looking at the judge going, or the jury and going, these people could never let a murderer go. That can't. The
Yeah.
justice system, like I had so much faith in the justice system.
And adults. You have faith in
Yeah,
adults.
faith in adults. Like adults always figure out,
Figure it out.
the crime. Like what?
And even when you're a kid too, if you're left alone but there's an adult around, you feel safer because there's an adult. But then, like, yeah.
Right. Do you remember when you first figured out that your parents were like wrong or like didn't know things?
Yes.
Was it hard for you? Or
Yeah, because I remember it.
like I remember at some point early adulthood just like coming to this realization that my parents were just human beings trying to figure it out, and like they make mistakes and they can be greedy and selfish and all these things that I just thought like, no way, my parents could never be like that.
I think at one point I learned the difference though between opinion and knowledge. And that was like a big thing.
What do you mean?
Like facts or opinions. Like the opinion that Trudeau's not doing a good job. And the fact that the sky is blue.
Okay, so
Or the fact that there's a sun. That's a fact.
So some Canadian could have the opinion Trudeau sucks. He needs to resign.
But one could argue that's not a fact.
Right. So that's an opinion. It's not a fact. But it's almost like a lot of these people that think that way are convinced like that it is a fact.
Okay, but this is a fact. It's here, now, in the present. But then some
This
people
object exists.
have that ridiculous notion that we're living in the Matrix, we're living in a simulation. And you can't argue against stuff like that.
Well, with politicians, the nature of it is like a lot of people think that they're corrupt. So the concept is like that you become a politician maybe for power or money, and then once you get, and even maybe you start out with good intentions, but then you get in, and there's all these business people around, and they're going, oh, we'll kick you some money if you help us with this, or lobby groups, and then politicians start to change, and they become kind of like not for the people as much as when they started. And I think that's why a lot of people criticize politicians.
Yeah, I think the money must change you, or changes some people.
Yeah.
And the power.
And it's happening in business as well. Like a lot of business owners, once they become wealthy, it seems like make less ethical business decisions.
Sorry, just going back to the different generations.
Yeah.
That's another thing I was thinking about too, though. When we were kids, wealthy was being a millionaire. That was wealth.
Right.
Today, no, it's being a billionaire. There's so many millionaires.
Yeah. Isn't that just inflation?
Yeah, it's inflation, but also I think we've also made a leap forward, and what we think is grandiose, it's been magnified. What's grandiose now is not what used to be grandiose. Because when we were kids, I didn't really understand the concept of having $1 billion. To me, $1 million, you're set for life.
Yeah.
Being a millionaire, that was, if I had $1 million, it's not if I had $1 billion.
Right. Like, there was less people on the earth. So there's some mathematics of like,
There's more millionaires.
once you have, I'm just saying, once you have 9 billion people on a planet, there's more products being sold, more money being generated.
Totally.
So when you become a businessman today, you have 9 billion customers to try to sell to, versus when we were growing up, there was only 5 billion.
Who do you think is going to be the first trillionaire?
I don't really know. And
Bezos?
it doesn't really affect me at all who has money. Like,
I know. It's just an interesting thought to me, because that's
Yeah.
the next step is the trillionaire.
yeah, like,
Because when we were kids too, Cody, we barely ever heard anyone throw around the word billionaire. But now we hear it every single day. Billionaire, Jeff Bezos, billionaire, Elon Musk. It's battle of the billionaires. What's the Facebook guy? He's a billionaire. Kanye's a billionaire.
yeah. Don't you find that it's irrelevant, like, to our... Like,
You could say
on a
that.
day-to-day basis, it doesn't affect me at
But
all.
when you see so many people suffering, and then people arguing about, I don't know, to me, greed is bad. And I think that's the Catholic in me. I think there's such thing as too much.
So greed is bad, meaning the billionaires, we should go in and take their money
Not
and
at all.
distribute it?
Not at all. No, not at all. Just to me, I wouldn't, if I think I had that much money, I think at one point I would feel uncomfortable, and I'd feel guilty. And because of the change that you could make with some of it. I don't know. I think
What do you think of this term, eat the rich? It comes from the French Revolution.
yeah.
And it's not necessarily, I read a little bit about it, it doesn't necessarily mean rich in that sense, but it's like oligarchs, like anyone in power.
Yeah. It's very French. And the French, though, have always been so revolutionary. Whenever there's like big student protests in Canada, you can always bet it's probably in Quebec, Montreal. I just find the French have always had that fighting spirit.
Yeah.
More so than anybody.
Right.
French Revolution.
Yeah.
But yeah, what time are we at here?
It's a 40-minute episode. Should we do our sponsor? We're sponsored by Douglas Mattresses, everyone. Go to douglas.ca tell them we sent you, and great mattresses made in Canada.
Awesome. At a time when Canada should be supporting Canada companies.
We should be doing that. I don't know if it's going to help anything, but that seems like our only plan at this point is to shop Canadian.
Yeah. Or maybe even, I was watching the movie Canadian Bacon last night about the States. It's Michael Moore's only...
Yeah, that's John Candy.
Yeah, Michael Moore directed it.
So that's an eerily
relevant
comedy. It's supposed to be a comedy, but it's about the idea that the Americans would
take Canada.
What's the reasoning? I forget. Why do they want to do that?
You know, I didn't finish it and I got distracted by my guitar, but that's definitely one I'm going to have to watch tonight.
I remember one scene where it's all the Americans in the movie that are sitting around watching television, and they're playing anti-Canadian propaganda.
Yeah, I do remember that.
Yeah, and so they're all sitting there and they're talking about how we have like Zambonis, that we have like a monopoly on Zambonis, and like they just have all these really random examples of like things Canadians do that make us like evil.
I remember thinking when I was listening to the dialogue that it seemed like it was the first draft. Just a lot of it seemed really forced, even the performances. I don't think it's that great of a film, which is why Michael Moore never directed a narrative film again. He went back to documentaries. But anyway, we digress. Thanks a lot, folks. And tune in for another amazing episode of the Straight Man Podcast.
Catch you next time.